The letter was already waiting on my kitchen counter when I came home that evening, slid halfway under a stack of unopened mail like it was trying to hide from me. Thick paper. Official seal. HOA letterhead stamped across the top in bold blue ink. I knew before I opened it that it wasn't good news. Still, nothing prepares you for seeing $5,000 fine written in all caps, centered like a verdict. The reason? Unauthorized exterior modification. Blue front door. I actually laughed at first. A short, disbelieving sound. I'd painted that door months ago. Deep navy blue. Clean, tasteful, not neon, not offensive, not disruptive to anything except apparently the ego of the HOA president. I flipped through the pages, expecting some kind of warning notice I'd missed. Maybe a request to repaint. There was nothing.
Just the fine.
Due in 10 days. Late fees escalating daily. I sat down at the table and read it again. Slower this time. The letter cited a bylaw amendment I'd never seen, approved at a special board meeting. No signatures from residents. No vote record. Just her name at the bottom, written in looping cursive like she was proud of it. The HOA president, let's call her Linda, had moved into the neighborhood about 2 years earlier. From day one, she treated the HOA like a personal kingdom. She drove a white SUV with the association logo magnetically slapped on the doors. She wore a blazer to mailbox conversations. She spoke in phrases like compliance expectations and corrective consequences, even when asking someone to move their trash bin 6 inches. I'd stayed off her radar until the door. The funny part? When I bought the house, the door was red. Bright red.
No issues then.
No fines. No warnings.
But blue?
Blue crossed a line, apparently. I emailed her that night, polite and brief. I asked for documentation showing the rule, proof of resident approval, and clarification on why no warning had been issued. I even attached photos of other homes with green doors, black doors, and one very questionable purple one 3 streets over. Her reply came less than 10 minutes later. Not an answer, a threat. She told me the fine was non-negotiable, that questioning it would be considered hostile resistance, and that failure to pay could result in liens, restricted access to amenities, and further enforcement actions. I stared at the screen, rereading that last line. Further enforcement actions. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a door.
It was about control.
The next morning, I found a bright orange violation sticker slapped crookedly next to my doorbell like a scarlet letter. Neighbors walked past pretending not to stare. Someone down the street gave me a sympathetic nod. Another woman whispered, "Good luck," like I'd been diagnosed with something terminal. By noon, Linda herself showed up. She didn't knock. She inspected, clipboard in hand.
Sunglasses on.
Standing just far enough back to look authoritative. When I opened the door, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes.
Still blue, she said.
I asked her calmly where the rule was published. She told me I didn't need to see it. Asked why no warning had been issued. She said warnings were a courtesy, not a requirement. Then she leaned in slightly and said, "Pay the fine, repaint the door, and this goes away. Fight it, and things get very expensive." That sentence changed everything, because she had no idea who she was talking to or what she'd just stepped into. That afternoon, I didn't repaint the door. I didn't argue with neighbors. And I definitely didn't pay the fine. Instead, I did something Linda clearly wasn't expecting. I started reading. Not HOA pamphlets. Not the watered-down community guidelines they hand out at move-in. I went straight to the recorded covenants, bylaws, amendments, and meeting minutes filed with the county. The real documents. The kind most HOA presidents assume homeowners will never bother to look up. It didn't take long to find the cracks. The so-called bylaw amendment Linda referenced had been passed during a closed board session labeled as an emergency meeting. No emergency described. No homeowner notification. No quorum listed. Even better, the amendment itself didn't ban blue doors. It gave the board the power to review exterior color changes after written notice and a 30-day correction period, which I never received. Legally, that fine was dead on arrival. But Linda wasn't done. Over the next 3 days, The pressure ramped up fast. First came a follow-up email warning me that unpaid fines could affect my standing within the community. Then, my key fob to the clubhouse stopped working. The pool gate wouldn't open. The gym access denied me like I was a criminal. That crossed a line. Amenities were paid for through mandatory dues. Cutting access without due process wasn't just petty, it was unlawful. And Linda knew it. Or at least she should have. I sent one more email.
Calm.
Professional. Attached with citations. I explained, clearly, that the fine was invalid, the enforcement improper, and the access restrictions a violation of both the bylaws and state statute. I requested immediate reinstatement and withdrawal of the fine. Her response came the next morning. One sentence. Failure to comply will result in escalated enforcement. No explanation. No acknowledgement. Just ego. That's when I stopped responding and started documenting. Every email. Every notice. Photos of the sticker. Screenshots of denied access. I even recorded a brief, legal audio note the next time she confronted me at the mailbox and told me I was setting a dangerous precedent. Then something interesting happened. Neighbors started talking. Quietly at first. A guy 2 houses down mentioned he'd been fined $800 for a mailbox that was apparently too reflective. A retired couple said Linda forced them to repaint their fence twice because the first shade of beige wasn't approved beige. One woman whispered that she'd been threatened with a lien over seasonal wreaths. Patterns emerged. This wasn't enforcement. It was intimidation. By the end of the week, I had emails from 5 different homeowners asking what I'd found and whether they should be worried. One even forwarded me a board notice she'd never been allowed to question. Linda had made one fatal mistake. She assumed everyone was isolated. She assumed wrong. On Friday evening, another letter appeared on my door. This one was thicker. Certified. Inside was a final notice demanding payment within 48 hours or facing formal action, including legal review and property restrictions. She'd signed it personally. I smiled. Because that letter gave me exactly what I needed. Proof of bad faith. HOA boards have authority, but only when they follow procedure. The moment they bypass notice, misuse funds, restrict paid access, or weaponize fines, they lose that protection. And Linda had done all of it in writing. That night, I drafted a response, but not to her. I sent a formal records request to the HOA management company demanding financial statements, enforcement logs, fine distributions, and meeting minutes for the past 2 years. By law, they had to comply. And I CC'd every board member. Saturday morning, the blue door was still blue. But now, it wasn't just a color. It was leverage. And Linda had no idea how fast her carefully built little kingdom was about to collapse, because Section 3 is where the documents come back and the truth gets very expensive for her. The documents arrived on Tuesday. Not by accident. Not casually. They came in a thick digital folder from the HOA management company, stamped with time logs and legal disclaimers, the kind that usually only get opened by attorneys. I could tell from the tone of the email that someone over there was nervous. Polite.
Careful.
Very different from Linda's usual chest-out authority. I started with the meeting minutes. Or rather, the lack of them. There were gaps everywhere. Months labeled, informal discussion. Votes recorded without attendance lists. Enforcement decisions approved without homeowner notification. And then there it was, the emergency meeting where the Blue Door Amendment had supposedly been passed. No emergency described. No vote count. No homeowner presence. Just Linda and 2 board allies signing off on something that directly expanded enforcement power. That alone was bad. Then I opened the financials. This is where everything snapped into focus. Fine revenue had spiked almost 300% in less than a year. Thousands of dollars collected under vague violation categories like aesthetic noncompliance and discretionary correction. Even better? The money wasn't going into community repairs or reserves. It was being labeled as administrative expenses. Translation: discretionary spending. I followed the trail. Reimbursements for consulting. Travel expenses. Branded materials. catering for board workshops. One receipt caught my eye: hotel accommodations listed under Linda's name for a regional HOA leadership summit. Paid for with fine money. That's when it stopped being petty and started being illegal. HOA fines are supposed to correct behavior, not fund lifestyles. Using them for personal benefit violates fiduciary duty, and in this case, potentially state law. And Linda hadn't even tried to hide it. She'd assumed no one would ever look. I compiled everything into a clean, chronological file. Citations, screenshots, highlighted statutes. Every misuse clearly marked. Then I sent a single email, not to Linda, to the rest of the board. I titled it, Request for Immediate Clarification Regarding HOA Enforcement and Financial Practices. Professional, neutral, devastating. Within hours, my phone buzzed. One board member called, voice shaking. She said she had no idea fines were being used that way. Another emailed asking if I'd be willing to discuss concerns privately. A third, silent until now, resigned that same evening. Linda, meanwhile, went quiet. No emails, no stickers, no threats. The next day, the clubhouse access worked again. My key fob lit green like nothing had ever happened. The violation sticker vanished from my door sometime overnight. Too late. By Thursday, word had spread. Neighbors compared fines. Stories lined up. Patterns became undeniable. A small group formed, homeowners who were done being scared and finally understood what had been happening. We requested a special meeting. Legally required.
Public.
On record. Linda tried to block it. Claimed insufficient signatures. Then scheduling conflicts. Then procedural irregularities. None of it stuck. The bylaws she'd been abusing worked just fine when used correctly. The meeting was set for Monday night. That weekend, she finally emailed me.
Short.
Careful. Friendly. She said the fine had been rescinded as a courtesy and suggested we put the misunderstanding behind us. She even offered to approve the blue door retroactively. I didn't reply, because by then the door didn't matter. Monday was coming, and for the first time since she'd crowned herself HOA president, Linda was going to have to explain, out loud, on record, in front of the people she'd been squeezing for years, exactly where all that fine money had gone. Monday night, the clubhouse was packed. Not just the usual handful of retirees and board regulars, but nearly half the neighborhood. People stood along the walls. Couples whispered. Phones were out. Someone had brought a printed copy of the bylaws like it was a weapon. Linda walked in 10 minutes late. She smiled like nothing was wrong. She opened the meeting with a rehearsed tone, talking about community standards and the importance of harmony. Then she tried to move straight into approving last month's minutes, without discussion. That's when I stood up.
Calm. Prepared.
Folder in hand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I asked a single question. Can the board explain why fine revenue increased nearly 300% this year, and why those funds were spent on non-community expenses? Silence. Linda laughed. A sharp, dismissive sound. She said the numbers were misinterpreted and suggested we take financial questions offline. Too late. Another homeowner spoke up. Then another. One asked about a lien threat over holiday decorations. A man in the back demanded to know why his pool access had been revoked without notice. A woman held up a receipt showing a fine paid for a fence she'd already repainted twice. The meeting unraveled fast. Linda tried to regain control, gavel pounding, voice rising. She claimed the board had broad discretion and accused homeowners of being ungrateful. That word did it. One of the board members, quiet until now, cleared his throat and asked for the floor. He read directly from the statute. Fines must follow notice. Funds must be used for community benefit. Emergency meetings required documented emergencies. None of those conditions had been met. Then he did something no one expected. He asked for a motion to suspend enforcement authority pending an independent audit. The room erupted. Hands went up. Voices agreed. The vote passed in seconds. Linda stood there, frozen. Her power, her favorite weapon, was gone. She tried one last move. Claimed the vote was invalid. Threatened legal action. Said she'd never allow an audit. The property manager spoke next. She reminded the room that failure to allow an audit could result in termination of their contract and mandatory reporting to state oversight bodies. Linda's face drained of color. By the end of the meeting, 3 things were official. All outstanding fines were paused. An external audit was approved. Linda was removed as acting president pending investigation. She didn't say a word as people filed out. The blue door was never mentioned again. Outside, neighbors stopped me to thank me. Some apologized for staying quiet. Others asked how they could help. The fear that had kept everyone isolated was gone, replaced with something much more dangerous to tyrants. Unity. Linda left through a side door. Alone. But the story wasn't over yet. The audit report arrived exactly 14 days later, and it landed like a controlled demolition. Page after page detailed violations, conflicts of interest, and unauthorized expenditures, all cross-referenced to statutes Linda had sworn to uphold. The numbers were precise. Dates aligned. Receipts matched signatures. There was no room for spin, only consequences waiting their turn. The first consequence was immediate. The management company terminated its contract, citing mandatory disclosure rules and reputational risk. They sent notices to every homeowner explaining the pause on enforcement and outlining refund procedures for improperly collected fines. Checks began arriving within the week, small victories wrapped in white envelopes that felt heavier than cash. The second consequence followed quietly. A letter from the State Oversight Office acknowledged receipt of the audit and requested supplemental documentation. No threats. No drama. Just process. Anyone who has dealt with regulators knows that tone means the decision is already made, and the rest is paperwork. Linda tried to resurface once. She emailed the board claiming the audit was biased and threatened defamation claims if her name was discussed publicly. The board's attorney replied instead. 1 paragraph. Neutral. Final. All communication would proceed through counsel. She never wrote again. By the end of the month, a special election was held. New board members were chosen from people who had never wanted power before, only fairness. They adopted clear notice rules, published transparent budgets, and capped fines at reasonable levels. Meetings were recorded. Minutes were posted. Fear lost its usefulness when light became routine. As for the blue door, it stayed blue. Not because it mattered, but because it symbolized something larger. Rules exist to serve communities, not egos. When they are twisted into weapons, they eventually cut the hand holding them. Neighbors changed, too. People waved again. Kids rode bikes without parents whispering about violations. The clubhouse hosted potlucks instead of hearings. It turned out most people had never wanted control, they just wanted peace. I never celebrated Linda's fall. Watching someone dismantle their own credibility is rarely satisfying. But I did appreciate the quiet that followed, the kind earned through accountability rather than silence. Power doesn't disappear when abused. It just moves, usually back to where it always belonged. Months later, a final notice confirmed the case was closed. Funds misused were reimbursed. Restrictions were lifted. The HOA survived, slimmer and humbler, anchored by rules that finally matched their purpose. That lesson lingered beyond our street. Nearby neighborhoods asked for templates, bylaws, and advice, and we shared everything freely. Transparency multiplied faster than intimidation ever had. It reminded me that systems fail quietly until someone documents the truth carefully and invites others to read it. Courage rarely looks loud. It looks organized, patient, and boring in the best way. The real victory wasn't embarrassment or revenge, but repair. Trust repaired. Processes repaired. Expectations repaired. Once repaired, they required maintenance, not heroes. So we kept publishing, kept listening, kept voting, and kept the doors metaphorically open. Ordinary habits replaced extraordinary conflict. In time, even the memories softened into instruction. If authority forgets its limits, community must remember its rights. If rules drift, sunlight realigns them. And if fear returns, paperwork, patience, and neighbors will always be enough. Nothing else was needed, and nothing else was taken because accountability had finally learned how to stay.
Put simply,
Here. The door caught sunlight one afternoon, blue against neutral siding, ordinary and unremarkable. That was the point. When fairness becomes normal, drama has nowhere to live. And when communities remember that no single person can ever hold them hostage again.